October 1998. Delivery driver Daniel Brooks never expected a routine detour to become the last normal decision of his life. The road closure forced him onto an old mountain highway, Route 13. No one in the nearby towns used that road anymore. Most people couldn't explain why. The locals avoided Route 13. Some called it superstition, others refused to talk about it at all. Daniel kept driving, completely unaware that someone had once disappeared on this very road. The rain never stopped, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. Daniel checked the road ahead. There was nothing but rain, fog, and silence. For miles, there wasn't another car, not a single light, not even a house. There was nothing unusual about the road, except that it felt strangely forgotten. Daniel never slowed down. He simply kept following the road into the fog. The deeper he drove, the quieter the world became. Every mile, the silence grew heavier. The highway no longer felt familiar. It felt as if the world behind him had simply vanished. No signs, no traffic, nothing, except the endless sound of rain. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he had been driving this road for far longer than he should have. The forest closed in, almost as if it wanted the road to disappear. The rain blurred the road ahead, but Daniel never considered turning back. Daniel couldn't remember seeing that marker before, yet it looked as though it had stood there for decades. Something about the silence felt wrong, not because of what Daniel could hear, but because of what he couldn't. Daniel glanced toward the roadside. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt familiar. Daniel checked the dashboard clock. He could have sworn more time had passed than it should have. The GPS had stopped making sense, yet the road kept pulling him deeper into the forest. The GPS insisted he was making progress, but the forest looked exactly the same. He couldn't explain why, but the road was beginning to feel strangely repetitive. The rain never stopped, neither did the road. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Something about this road didn't feel right anymore. Even the forest had gone silent, only the rain remained. For just a second, he thought he saw another road leading into the woods, then it was gone. He looked back into the mirror. There was nothing behind him, only the road disappearing into the fog. Every mile felt the same, every turn looked familiar. He reached for the radio, static, nothing but static. Every mile marker, every road sign, had disappeared. The forest seemed to swallow every sound. There were no more signs, only things that looked like signs. By now, Daniel couldn't remember the last time he had seen another car. Daniel checked the clock again. Only 2 minutes had passed. There were houses once, or at least, there must have been. The trees never seemed to end. Every turn looked exactly like the last. The farther Daniel drove, the older the road seemed to become. Daniel had already passed the last warning sign. From that moment on, there was nothing to suggest anyone had driven this road in years. The road kept stretching into the darkness. With every mile, Daniel felt farther away from the world he knew. Daniel had driven mountain roads for years, and he knew the difference between an old road and a forgotten one. The pavement beneath his truck looked as though it hadn't been repaired in decades. Moss pushed through the cracks, branches stretched over the asphalt, and every mile made the forest feel more isolated than the last. There were no tire tracks, no signs of recent traffic, nothing to suggest another vehicle had passed this way for a very long time. There was something unusual about the landscape surrounding Route 13. The farther Daniel drove, the fewer signs of civilization remained. Telephone poles leaned into the forest, swallowed by vines and moss, as though no one had maintained them in decades. The silence outside never changed. No passing cars, no distant engines, not even the sound of wildlife, only the steady rain, and the feeling that the road ahead had been abandoned long before Daniel ever found it. Daniel had expected the shortcut to save him time. Instead, every mile seemed to pull him farther away from the world he had left behind. The road showed no evidence of maintenance. Moss covered the broken asphalt, fallen branches narrowed the path, and even the old mile markers had nearly disappeared beneath years of neglect. It wasn't just that the road had been abandoned. It felt as though people had slowly stopped coming here altogether. The deeper Daniel ventured into Route 13, the stranger the road became. Old signs still stood among the trees, but years of rain, wind, and decay had erased nearly every trace of what they once said. It was as if the road no longer wanted travelers to know where they were, or where they were going. Daniel glanced ahead, expecting to see another intersection, another house, or even another vehicle. Instead, the forest continued without end. Mile after mile, the only things waiting for him were broken asphalt, silent trees, and a road that seemed determined to keep its secrets. Daniel slowed down without realizing it. The road demanded his full attention now. Every few hundred yards brought another reminder that Route 13 had been left behind years ago. Old signs, broken pavement, leaning poles, and now abandoned mailboxes standing silently among the trees. Whoever had once lived out here was gone. There were no lights, no driveways, no tire tracks leading away from the road. Only rain falling onto cracked asphalt that seemed to disappear into an endless wall of fog. For the first time since turning onto Route 13, Daniel began to wonder if taking the shortcut had been a mistake. Daniel had stopped looking for landmarks. Every mile looked almost identical to the one before it, yet the road somehow felt different with each passing minute. The forest seemed to press closer against the truck, swallowing the edges of the pavement until the highway felt more like a narrow path through forgotten wilderness. He searched for anything familiar, a road name, a house, a passing vehicle, but found nothing, only old signs whose messages had disappeared with time. Only abandoned mailboxes with no homes left to serve, only the sound of rain tapping against the windshield. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the growing realization that Route 13 wasn't simply isolated, it felt erased. By now, Daniel had lost all sense of how far he had traveled. The rain never stopped, the fog never lifted. Every mile looked almost identical to the last, yet the road somehow felt older with each passing minute. The cracks in the pavement had become so wide that grass and moss had begun reclaiming what had once been a state highway. He glanced at the dashboard clock before looking back at the road ahead. Nothing. No headlights, no homes, no movement anywhere beyond the trees. Then, through the fog, he noticed what looked like an old side road disappearing into the forest. It wasn't marked on the map he had checked earlier that evening. It looked as though it had been abandoned long before Route 13 itself. Daniel drove past it without slowing down. He had no idea that he had just passed the last chance to turn around. The deeper Daniel drove, the more Route 13 felt disconnected from the rest of the world. He tried to remember the map he had looked at before leaving town. There should have been farms somewhere in these mountains, small houses, gravel driveways, power lines leading to someone's porch. Instead, every sign of life seemed to end at the edge of the forest. The only evidence that people had ever been here came in fragments: a rusted mailbox, an unreadable road sign, a forgotten side road. Now, through the drifting fog, Daniel caught sight of what looked like the remains of an old wooden fence. It appeared for only a moment before vanishing back into the trees, as though the forest had been slowly swallowing everything left behind. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, for reasons he couldn't explain. He no longer felt like he was driving toward a destination. He felt as though the road itself had chosen where he was going. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, but his mind kept searching for an explanation. Nothing about Route 13 made sense anymore. The signs of civilization hadn't disappeared overnight. They had faded slowly, one piece at a time, until only fragments remained. A rusted mailbox, a collapsed fence, an unreadable road sign. Then, through the rain and fog, he caught sight of something that didn't belong in the middle of an abandoned forest, an old wooden swing set. It stood deep between the trees, barely visible through the mist. No house, no driveway, no footprints. Just a playground that looked as though no child had touched it for decades. Daniel told himself there had to be an explanation, but for the first time that night, he wasn't entirely convinced. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Route 13 wasn't simply forgotten, it felt remembered, but only by the forest itself. The trees seemed to close a little tighter around the road with every passing minute, swallowing fences, signs, and anything people had left behind. Then something caught his attention. Just off the shoulder stood a small wooden cross, leaning quietly beneath the trees. There was no fresh paint, no flowers, no name that he could read through the rain. Only a weathered memorial that looked as though it had been standing there for many years. Daniel slowed ever so slightly. He told himself it was probably the site of an old traffic accident. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that whoever the cross had been placed for had never really left Route 13. Daniel blinked for just a fraction of a second. He thought he saw someone standing among the trees. He instinctively looked back at the road, then searched the same spot again. Nothing. Just fog drifting silently between the trunks. He told himself it had been nothing more than a trick of the light, a broken branch, a shadow, anything but a person still. His foot eased off the accelerator for the first time that night. Daniel wasn't just driving through Route 13. He was looking for someone. Daniel slowed almost to a crawl. The shape ahead was no longer just a shadow. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. She stood alone beside the road, her back turned toward the truck, wearing what looked like an old raincoat that had once been red. She didn't wave. She didn't move. She didn't even seem to notice the sound of the engine behind her. Every instinct told Daniel to stop and make sure she was all right. But something about the silence surrounding her felt completely wrong. Daniel pressed gently on the brakes. He never took his eyes off the place where the figure had been standing. The truck rolled forward another few feet before finally slowing almost to a stop. Then, The shoulder of the road was empty, no footsteps, no movement through the trees, no sound except the rain falling onto the cracked pavement. Daniel stared into the fog, trying to convince himself that he had imagined the entire thing, but deep down, he already knew he hadn't. Whatever had been standing beside Route 13 was gone. Daniel never found the girl he thought he had seen that night. The only trace of anyone who had ever stood along Route 13 was an old newspaper, soaked by decades of rain. It told the story of Emily Carter. She had disappeared on October 17, 1978. Despite one of the largest search efforts the county had ever seen, she was never found. Daniel left Route 13 before sunrise. He never spoke publicly about what happened that night. Drivers still report seeing a lone figure standing silently beside the road, waiting for someone to stop, and when they finally look away, all that remains is a faded red balloon.